This video contains plot information for Until Dawn. If you don't want spoilers, I would recommend you click away. Thank you.
Oh, you better believe this little puppy's going viral, ladies and germs. I mean, we got unrequited love. We got blood. I don't think there's enough hard drives in China to count all the views we're gonna get, you guys.
This is Josh. Josh made a lot of mistakes that meshed together to create potentially the worst possible situation for him and his friends on their trip in the mountains. In real life, stay away from people like Josh. In games, however, his choices make for a heck of a good show. Let's get into it. The genius of Until Dawn is the way it so perfectly integrates different genres of horror. When a piece of media tries to throw a bunch of themes and plot points together to see what sticks, it can easily end up messy and scattered, and we're gonna get into what happens in Until Dawn and why it works so well comprehensively as a story. Let's get the elephant in the room out of the way, though.
Let's take a moment to address the elephant in the room.
Supermassive gets some bombastic side-eye for what it decided to make the biggest bad in this story. See, they nabbed a creature from indigenous stories and turned it into the main monster, grabbing bits of that culture and integrating it in strange ways that make it seem like an indigenous voice wasn't on the writing staff. Francesca Amie Johnson's A Creature Without a Cave, linked below, was a great exploration of what a boon to the game actually having someone who is knowledgeable to the subject matter would be. Thankfully, this is just a one-off oversight, as Supermassive never appropriates the culture stuff in ways that communities at large have asked them not to again. Due to respecting superstitions, I am going to be referring to these bad boys as Jimothies. Now into the game content. This is an emerging game style that is primarily third person, whose controls are a real treat for people who particularly like the controls of the Mako in the original Mass Effect, and is highly focused on character choices actively changing the narrative and outcome of the story, as opposed to many Choices Matter games that somewhat give off an illusion of choice. These are very much like the Quantic Dream games, Fahrenheit, Heavy Rain, and Detroit Become Human, though those games are more like mysteries or action, where Until Dawn is horror, where the primary focus is trying to make all your characters survive until the end of their experience. Something more easily said than done. Simple choices can end with disastrous consequences, and I really want to dig into that as an element to how that worked so well for this game. Until Dawn was marketed as a way for players to interact with horror games in a way that wouldn't leave them screaming at the screen and instead put the power of their choices in their hands. A bit of a cheeky, okay, go ahead, do better with the characters if you can. Personally, I feel like that doesn't really work, because if we could control the characters, we'd probably opt to not go visit a remote cabin at the invite of a brother of two women who we inadvertently got killed just a year prior. That's like, at least an 18 months kind of thing. It's a bit more that the game lets you choose between major decision points that characters may or may not make the wisest of choices in, which I can absolutely agree with. I mean, hey, if characters in horror were entirely smart, what story would there be for us to enjoy? Let's dive into what I love about this. Until Dawn is a game that melds subgenres of horror, something that is in no way easy to do well. When the game begins, it sets the stage pretty clearly. Our main cast expositions and tutorials their way up via cable car and walking around. Side note, wow, this is how video games and horror mix super well together. Horror needs a good calm before the storm, and getting players to have some low-stakes tutorializing and exposition chatting is a great use of that time. Currently, we have no reason to think that this game is going to be a mix of anything horror-wise. We have an idea that some strange figure is a problem based on the opening cutscene, but we don't have much idea how that factors into the story. There's some creepy ghost worries, and characters see some supernatural bits and bobs that might psych them out, but then all of the events start to kick in. Jessica's kidnapped by somebody outside of the cabin they're in, potentially dying or going missing during that encounter. The others are terrorized by a masked man who kills Josh in a non-choice of a choice-based cutscene, more on this later, chases after them and forces Chris to choose between his or Ashley's life in a second Saw-like choice-based death trap. As far as the player knows at this point, this is all connected, the masked man serving as one central antagonist, attempting to kill them off one by one, and successfully taking out one or two of them along the way. Then we're hit with a big reveal. The masked man creating the Saw traps was Josh all along. He had created this whole trip to prank his friends and embarrass them to make them all feel what his sister felt before he lost her and her twin. His death was a hoax. However, he's blamed for Jessica's death, or disappearance, which was thought to be a death, and imprisoned as a result. But he acts surprised and confused about the news about Jessica. It rapidly becomes clear to us that what happened to her wasn't something that he was responsible for. We have the ghost weirdness figured out, the violent masked man figured out, the Saw traps too, but there's still one thing that we haven't accounted for. What grabbed her? This is when we learn that something's been bad on the mountain all along, and a bunch of horror protagonists were doing what they do every time and playing with fire without knowing it. The only bad thing around here are the Jimothies, and they're about to get much, much worse. Let's talk about the bread and butter of Until Dawn at this point. point, the power of choice. There are a lot of big choices in this game. Many of them are obvious and some more surprising than others, from ones that affect your relationships with each other to the ones that save lives. Pro tip, if you like Jessica, don't take your time trying to save her. Picking to save Ashley or Josh was a fascinating one. The player was likely expected to try to save Ashley due to Chris's clear status as her love interest, but the choice is set up in such a way that's nebulous enough that when the player tries to save Josh and fails, it could be chalked up to a player/character misunderstanding about how the choice system worked. Frustrating in the moment for sure, but when it all comes out that Josh had orchestrated the system, it's clear that this one is all diegetic. Not all choices have no meaning though. Try to save yourself by killing Ashley in the next saw trap, and well, she might just react accordingly later on. I love the integration of non-acting too. It shows you what it's like when you're pressured into dealing with Emily in a situation with no evidence. Everyone who says if they're in a zombie-like scenario saying they'd have no mercy if someone got bit, well, an innocent person might just die if that same logic is applied. Heck, there's a chance for your own skills to really factor into it. The don't move segments mean you have to stay still lest nah, I can't pretend I'm going to talk positively about this one. These are horrible, and thank goodness later games do away with these. I just set my controller on a table, no shame. But at the end of the day, seeing what choices there were and how they affected things was incredible. It made me feel super smart as I worked hard to keep the animals alive, kept relationships high, and overall was able to help the cast the best I could. Well, up until the end when I misunderstood a choice I was making and killed all but one of the main cast members. My be y'all. Despite, the issues mentioned before, I loved the totem system, even though I wish it was in a different form. I think out of all the Supermassive games, this is the best one handling premonition, letting you see different futures, in some cases giving hints to what choices to make and what terrible fates to avoid. As you unlock these, you get the opening monologue by the hidden man you originally think is your enemy, but learn either through collection or through his scene that he's actually been one of your greatest allies all along. To the genre, after the Josh twist, suddenly the game goes from a survival against a monstrous person to survival against literal monsters and discovering how the situation came about and how our actions put us in increasing danger over time. It becomes straightforward now, a fight to keep our protagonists alive as much as possible, with a few required deaths I'm not a fan of, you can't win them all. It wraps up from there with a neat little bow, with ending interviews from everyone alive, and honestly, I loved it. All in all, I feel like it'd be silly to recommend this game since I'm almost certain everyone watching this has already played, but if somehow you haven't, give it a shot. Plot spoilers or no, it's well worth it. Thank you all for watching, and please give this a like and subscribe if you enjoyed it. It really helps with what I do. I hope you all have a good day, and I will see you all in Spooky Scary Summer Camp.
Sleepover. Can we order pizza?